Please welcome Senior Vice President of Analytics and Chief Economist of AirDNA, Jamie Lane.
Hey everyone, thank you all for coming into my session after lunch. It was delicious. Can we get a round of applause for lunch? I love a conference with good food. I'm Jamie Lane, Chief Economist at AirDNA. AirDNA, we are the global leader in data analytics for the short-term rental industry. And what I'm going to try to do today is walk through about 30 minutes of content in about 10 minutes. So we're going to go quick. We're going to run through the slides. And what I've sort of boiled it down to is trying to get 5 trends that you can sort of take home. And if there's sort of any takeaways that you can actually get from this conference, maybe one of those takeaways you'll sort of get from this presentation. So starting with the economy and overall KPIs. So who here thinks we went into a recession last year? Will, we did not go into recession last year. Employment was up 2.5%. We are at all-time lows of unemployment. Overall, the economy is actually performing pretty well. But what I wanted to sort of point out are the things that sort of make the biggest difference for overall travel. And when I'm looking at the data, when we're looking at coming up with our forecast of what's going to happen in the industry, we're focused on 2 things, jobs and income. Do people have jobs? If they have jobs, they're going to travel. Are they gaining more income than inflation's taking away their purchasing power? And that's real personal income. They're going to be spending. And then the question is, are they going to be spending on travel? And even with all the sort of COVID spending issues, we're still seeing consumer spending up 2%. And we're seeing spending on services up north of that and spending on travel up even higher than that. So overall, I'm feeling good about the overall economy and what it means for our industry today. And as far as we can look out over the next 3 years, these are the forecasts of those key variables from Oxford Economics. So in things to worry about right now, I'm not super worried about the overall economy. But now we get into demand trends. So what's actually happening in terms of overall number of people staying in short-term rentals, staying in hotels, and how does that compare to prior years? And we're all in this industry, and we know that things have not been great. And we're going to get into some of the longer-term trends that we've seen. But overall, you look at hotel demand. We've been flat to negative for a full year. That's negative year-over-year change in demand for hotels for over a full year. We look at short-term rentals. We got to pretty weak growth, and my mic go off, in Q2 of 2023, but now we're starting to grow again. So we look at like long-term, and now on terms of overall lodging demand, we're typically growing at about 2% per year, and you can look at that going back over the past like 3 decades. So now we've seen this massive growth in short-term rental demand from like 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. We saw what happened during COVID of demand pullback, demand growth, sort of major adoption of short-term rentals. And we're going to get into this period of like okay growth, or normal growth. And the industry really hasn't seen normal growth. So what does that mean? It means that properties that are making changes, adding new amenities, sort of having the differentiation that guests really want, are going to be the ones that continue to grow demand and continue to see outsized growth. So when we look at one way we can break out demand, and this shows by bedroom count, demand change as of 2023 relative to 2019, and the growth over this period. And what we see the most growth that's happening in this sector in the US is in sort of that 2 to 3 bedroom, like core short-term rental inventory has done really well over that time period. But now what do we see happening now? It's actually, goes back to this like COVID trope of like the larger the bedroom count, the better the performance of the past year. So those properties that are able to continue to grow demand, and when you look at private shared rooms, like Airbnb relaunched private rooms last year. What do we see? Demand's actually down 6%. And we see it down almost 50% relative to pre-COVID levels. So that type of demand isn't there. But when we look at the larger unit types, and Airbnb called it out in their earnings call last month, that demand is there, and we're seeing strong growth for the type of accommodations that short-term rentals really excel at. Now supply. demand's growing. Why is it feeling so bad out there? And we look at supply growth. Right now we're at about 9% supply growth, and that's the lowest it's been in almost a 2-year period. This time last year was at 16%. 2 years ago it was at 23%. So this is actually a good sign that supply growth is slowing because we see demand growth growing. At some point, those lines are converge, and that convergence means occupancy growth. So what's doing it? And one, weakening performance, but also high interest rates. Like, it is a tough real estate investment environment, and we're seeing demand for second homes has now dropped to a 6-year low. We look at data for 2024 right now, we're seeing it decline even further, down about 7%. So for existing operators, that's good. For people trying to invest and grow their portfolios, this is still a pretty tough environment. So our forecasts. So what do we think supply growth is going to be going forward? Broadly, we expect it to continue to decelerate and decelerate across all location types in the US. Point out though, one of the weakest one, urban. So we're essentially seeing flat growth in Q2. It was actually down, and we expect that weakness to continue. Big part of that is, and we'll see it in the occupancy numbers, weak occupancy, but also regulation. So in New York, we've seen an 83% decline in available short-term rentals. Markets around the world are seeing the impact of regulation, and this is something to really pay attention to. British Columbia, supply down 8% in regulated markets with the new regulation that just went into place. So RevPAR, and sort of building up to it. Occupancy, we're now well below pre-COVID levels. So we reached record highs in 2021. We sort of got back there last year in terms of declines. Now we're below it. We essentially erased all of those gains and now even below. But it's really a different story when we look across location types. So we look at coastal, mountain, and even small town rural. Yes, we're down from the highs in 2021, but we're still higher than 2018, 2019 levels. Still good to be in mountain, lake, coastal markets in terms of relative performance. But where are we struggling? It's the suburban, urban, and mid-sized cities. So the large cities like New York, LA, Atlanta, Chicago. Occupancy never got back to pre-COVID levels in the large cities and is now declining even further. That's sort of leading to a lot of the companies that we see sort of going out of business in the short-term rental sector, especially in some of these urban type markets. So no surprise, RevPAR has been negative over the past 24 months. You guys will notice this, it was really April of 2022, last time RevPAR was positive. Funny enough, that was the last conference I think Scott Shafford went to. We got him back here now. Maybe that means we're back to positive in terms of RevPAR growth. We've had the sort of Scott hiatus at industry conferences. Our expectation is that we turn to positive in the back half of 2024. When we look at performance of RevPAR, though, across, and we can cut it in all sorts of different ways. One way I think it's really interesting is when we look at property managers versus individual hosts. Now, this is a fun analysis. I can't go into it too deep, but what it shows is that individual hosts have actually been outperforming on the budget and economy price tiers. So these are the lower price units in the market. And where professional managers have been outperforming is in the upscale and luxury tier. And that's actually in the higher tiers where we're seeing the highest RevPAR performance relative to 2019 levels. And where we're seeing the weakest performance is on the budget and economy. And that's actually what we're seeing in the hotel industry too. We're seeing the biggest declines right now in occupancy is in that budget and economy tiers, where we are seeing some pressure in terms of consumer spending, so that the haves are spending, the have-nots are not. So what is our outlook? So our forecast is for essentially flat RevPAR growth, so turning back to positive, some slight increases in 2024, back to a 3% increase in 2025. So we do think this year's the last year of negative RevPAR. And a big piece of that, you look at the nights listed, is that we expect supply growth to only be 6% next year compared to the growth of 23% in 2022. Some new research that we have coming out, last two slides, we saw this great migration happen over the past 3 years. What that means for short-term rentals is, you had a mass exodus of people from New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, heading to Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Tampa, Atlanta. These locations lead to people vacationing in entirely different markets. So what we've done an analysis of what markets should see the biggest upside from these migration trends. And in the report that we're going to have coming out, also looks at over the next 5 years where we expect people to be migrating to and what that could mean for vacation rental demand. So if I was investing today, these are the markets that are going to come to the top of the list because of the sort of migration and employment trends of the feeder markets to these vacation rental areas. So with that, if you want a copy of the slides, feel free to reach out to me, Jamie at airdna.co. I thank you for listening.